You know that phrase, history repeats itself? Well, nowhere is that more true than in Afghanistan. For over 3 centuries, empire after empire has tried to conquer this land.
And what's fascinating is how this pattern keeps repeating, right? From ancient Persians to modern superpowers, they all face similar challenges.
Let's start at the beginning. When did this cycle of invasions really kick off?
Well, if we're looking at documented history, one of the earliest major invasions was by Darius I of Persia around 500 BC. The Persians actually divided Afghanistan into provinces called satrapies.
Satrapies? That's a new one for me.
Yeah, they were like administrative regions, each governed by a satrap, kind of like a provincial governor. They had 4 main ones: Arya, which is modern-day Herat; Arachosia, covering Kandahar; Bactriana in the north; and Gandhara, which included Kabul.
And then came Alexander the Great, right?
Exactly. In 330 BC, Alexander invaded as part of his war against Persia. And here's something interesting. You know the city of Kandahar?
Yeah?
It's actually named after Alexander. Kandahar is a contraction of Iskandahar, Alexander's name in the local language.
No way. That's incredible. So his legacy literally lives on in the name of the city.
And after Alexander, the region saw a succession of different rulers. The Mauryan Empire took control, and under Emperor Ashoka, Buddhism actually became the dominant religion until the Islamic conquest.
Then we have quite a jump in time to one of history's most famous conquerors, Genghis Khan.
Right, the Mongols swept through in the 13th century. But what's really interesting is that Afghanistan wasn't united as a single country until the 1700s.
That's much later than I would have thought.
And by 1870, after various Arab conquests, Islam had become deeply rooted in the region. This religious transformation would play a huge role in future conflicts.
Speaking of future conflicts, let's talk about the British Empire's attempts to control Afghanistan. 16,500 people set out through the freezing mountains of Afghanistan. Only one survived.
This whole conflict, known as the Great Game, was largely based on British fears that weren't even real.
Wait, what do you mean they weren't real?
Well, according to historical records, except for Emperor Paul in 1800, no Russian Tsar ever seriously considered invading India. Yet Britain spent decades and countless lives fighting to prevent exactly that.
So Britain invaded Afghanistan 3 times based on, what, essentially paranoia?
Pretty much. You see, Britain saw Afghanistan as this crucial buffer zone between their prized possession, India, and Russian expansion in Central Asia. Any Russian movement in the region, no matter how small, was seen as a direct threat to British India.
Take us back to how this all started.
It began in 1838 with the First Anglo-Afghan War. The British were convinced that Afghanistan's ruler, Dost Muhammad Khan, was getting too friendly with Russia.
And they couldn't have that, could they?
No, they couldn't, so they decided to depose him and replace him with a former ruler, Shah Shuja, who they thought would be more, cooperative.
How did that work out for them?
Oh, it was a disaster. Initially, they succeeded in installing Shah Shuja, but the Afghans wouldn't accept a ruler imposed by foreign powers.
Makes sense. I mean, who would?
Exactly. And here's where it gets really interesting. You know how I mentioned the term Great Game earlier? It was actually first used for games of risk like cards and dice before anyone applied it to this conflict.
That's weirdly appropriate, considering how much of a gamble these invasions were.
And speaking of gambles, the British made a catastrophic one in 1842. When they tried to retreat from Kabul, they sent out a column of 4,500 British troops and 12,000 civilians.
And only one person made it, right? That's just staggering.
Yes, Dr. William Bryden. He reached Jalalabad alone, barely alive. The rest were either killed by Afghan forces or died from the brutal winter conditions.
But incredibly, this wasn't the end of Britain's involvement in Afghanistan, was it?
Not at all. In 1878, they invaded again, still worried about Russian influence.
Even after what happened the first time?
Yes, and this time they managed to establish more control. They forced Afghanistan to accept British control over its foreign affairs through the Treaty of Gandamak.
So they achieved their goal this time?
Well, sort of. They installed a new ruler, Amir Abdur Rahman, known as the Iron Amir, who governed with, let's say, extreme brutality.
How brutal are we talking about?
He executed large numbers of opponents, made conversion to Islam mandatory, and forcibly relocated entire tribes that opposed him.
And Britain was okay with this?
As long as he kept Russian influence out, they didn't seem too concerned about his methods.
You mentioned 3 invasions. What about the third?
That was in 1919, and it actually led to Afghanistan gaining complete independence from British influence.
So in the end, all these invasions, what did they really achieve?
That's the fascinating part. Despite the military disasters, especially in the First Anglo-Afghan War, Britain actually achieved its broader strategic goal.
How so?
They managed to maintain relatively friendly relations with Afghanistan, which continued to serve as that buffer state they wanted between British India and Russian territory.
So you're saying they lost the battles but won the war?
In a way, yes, though at an enormous cost in lives and resources.
You know what's striking about all this? The parallels with modern geopolitics.
Absolutely. Afghanistan's position as a strategic crossroads hasn't changed. It's still caught between competing powers.
And foreign powers still seem to learn these lessons the hard way.
Exactly. The British Empire was the world's superpower then, controlling about 53% of Europe's wealth.
Wait, really? That much?
Yes, their gross national product was $8.2 billion. Only Russia and France came close. Yet all that power couldn't secure their objectives in Afghanistan.
It really shows how military might doesn't always translate to political success.
And here's something else interesting. The British actually helped create Afghanistan's modern borders during this period.
How did that happen?
In 1893, Sir Mortimer Durand, the British India foreign minister, drew a border between Afghanistan and British India that had little to do with demographic realities.
And I'm guessing that had long-term consequences?
Oh yes, that border, now known as the Durand Line, is still a source of tension in the region today.
It's amazing how decisions made during the Great Game are still affecting politics today.
And you know what's really ironic? The whole thing was based on a misunderstanding of Russian intentions.
Right, because the Russians weren't actually planning to invade India.
No, they weren't. The American historian David Fromkin noted that Britain's interpretation of Russian moves was often far-fetched.
It's like they were fighting a threat that existed mainly in their imagination.
Exactly. Though Russia did use Britain's fears to their advantage, often threatening moves toward India just to get concessions from Britain in Europe.
Ah, so they were playing their own version of the Great Game.
Yes, and they called it the Tournament of Shadows, which is quite poetic when you think about it.
Because they were fighting over shadows of threats that weren't really there?
Precisely. And thousands of people died because of these shadows.
So what happened after the British finally gave up?
Well, in 1921, after the Third British-Afghan War, Afghanistan finally gained independence. And then something interesting happened. They started modernizing.
Really? How so?
Under Amir Amanullah Khan, they launched major socio-economic reforms. He even declared Afghanistan a monarchy in 1926 and tried to limit the power of the traditional National Council.
I'm guessing that didn't go over well with everyone?
Not at all. By 1929, there was so much opposition that Amanullah had to abdicate and leave the country.
Let's jump ahead to the Cold War era. How did Afghanistan get caught up in that?
Well, by the 1950s, Afghanistan had developed close ties with the Soviet Union. They were getting economic and military assistance from the Soviets. Christmas Eve, 1979, while the world celebrated peace on Earth, Soviet tanks were rolling into Afghanistan.
The Soviets had been watching Afghanistan closely for years, especially after a communist government took power in 1978.
Wait, so there was already a communist government in Afghanistan? Why did the Soviets need to invade then?
Well, that's where it gets interesting. See, the communist government, led by Nur Muhammad Taraki, was actually pretty unstable. They were trying to implement these radical socialist reforms that the deeply religious Afghan population just wasn't having.
Ah, so not exactly a match made in heaven.
Not at all. And it gets worse. There was this power struggle between two factions, the People's Party and the Banner Party. They were technically both communist, but they couldn't work together effectively.
So internal fighting within the communist government itself?
Exactly. And by late 1979, the Soviets were getting really worried. Their client state was falling apart, and Islamic insurgencies were popping up everywhere.
And that's when they decided to step in?
Right. On December 24th, 1979, they launched their invasion. Started with elite troops being airdropped into major cities, followed by motorized divisions crossing the border.
That sounds like a massive operation.
Oh, it was. Initially, they sent in about 30,000 troops. And get this, one of their first moves was having the KGB infiltrate the presidential palace and poison the president and his ministers.
Wait, what? They poisoned their own allies?
Yeah, they wanted to install their own puppet leader, Babrak Karmal. But here's where it gets really interesting. You know how Afghanistan had been a strategic battleground for centuries?
What do you mean?
Well, back in the 19th century, this area was known as the Great Game, this huge strategic rivalry between British and Russian empires. Afghanistan was like this buffer zone everyone wanted to control.
So the Soviets were basically playing the same game, just in a Cold War context?
Exactly. But they severely underestimated what they were getting into. The resistance groups, known as the Mujahideen, quickly organized and started fighting back.
And these Mujahideen, they weren't just fighting alone, right?
No, they had significant international backing. The United States, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia all provided support. The CIA was particularly active in supplying weapons and funding.
So it became like a proxy war?
Absolutely. And the numbers were staggering. By 1986, the Soviets had around 115,000 troops in Afghanistan.
That's a huge commitment. Must have cost them a fortune.
You'd think so, but here's something surprising. The actual financial cost wasn't that devastating. According to CIA estimates, it only amounted to about 2.5% of Soviet military spending per year.
Only 2.5%? Then why do people say this war helped bring down the Soviet Union?
Well, the real damage wasn't financial, it was psychological and political. It shattered this myth of Soviet military invincibility.
How so?
The Soviets lost over 14,000 soldiers, had more than 53,000 wounded, and lost hundreds of aircraft and tanks. Their military reputation took a massive hit.
And what about the Afghan casualties?
The numbers are devastating. Over 58,000 Afghan military personnel were killed, and civilian casualties were even higher.
That's horrific.
And it created one of the world's largest refugee crises. By the late 1980s, there were more than 6 million Afghan refugees, mostly in Pakistan and Iran.
1 in 4 Afghans became refugees? That's staggering.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting? The refugees in Pakistan and Iran had very different experiences.
How so?
In Pakistan, they got international aid and lived in camps that eventually became like villages. But in Iran, they were largely left to fend for themselves in urban centers.
Back to the Soviets, how did this affect their society?
It created this interesting phenomenon. Veterans organizations called agency started forming. These groups actually helped weaken the Communist Party's political control.
So the war actually created new forms of political participation in the Soviet Union?
Exactly. And it started transforming Soviet media too, leading to more open discussion and criticism, what later became known as glasnost.
When did the Soviets finally decide to leave?
The withdrawal began in 1988 and was completed by February 1989. There's actually this ironic detail. They crossed back over what was called the Friendship Bridge.
The Friendship Bridge? That's quite a name for retreating from a failed invasion.
Right? But here's the thing. The war didn't end with the Soviet withdrawal. The communist government in Kabul actually held on until 1992.
Really? How did they manage that?
Surprisingly, the Afghan army actually performed better without direct Soviet involvement. They achieved a stalemate that exposed some of the Mujahideen's weaknesses.
But they still fell eventually?
Yes, by 1992 the government collapsed, but that wasn't the end of Afghanistan's troubles.
No, it seems like it was just the beginning of another chapter.
Exactly. The country fell into civil war, and eventually this created the conditions for the Taliban to take power in 1996.
Looking back, what do you think was the Soviet Union's biggest mistake?
They fundamentally misunderstood Afghan society. They thought they could modernize and secularize a deeply traditional religious country through force.
And that's a pretty costly mistake when you're committing hundreds of thousands of troops.
The total Soviet deployment over the war was actually around 620,000 personnel. Think about that scale.
And all those lives lost.
Yes, and beyond the human cost, the war had these ripple effects that contributed to massive changes in both Afghanistan and the Soviet Union.
Like what?
Well, in the Soviet Union, it created this divide between the military and the Communist Party. Some leaders started doubting whether military force could maintain Soviet control.
That must have been quite a shift in thinking.
Huge shift. Remember, this was a country that had successfully used its military to crush uprisings in places like Czechoslovakia and Hungary.
So Afghanistan really changed their whole perspective?
Absolutely. It showed that military might alone couldn't solve political problems, especially in a place with such different cultural and religious values.
And the impact on Afghanistan itself?
The country was left devastated. Infrastructure destroyed, millions displaced, and a power vacuum that led to years of civil war.
It's amazing how decisions made in Moscow that Christmas Eve had such far-reaching consequences.
And you know what's particularly striking? This wasn't even the last time Afghanistan would face foreign intervention.
History does seem to repeat itself there.
Which makes understanding this period even more crucial. The patterns we see in the Soviet-Afghan War have echoed through later conflicts. "5 weeks. That's all it took to topple a regime that had controlled 90% of Afghanistan."
Well, on September 14th, the US made very specific demands. They wanted the Taliban to surrender all known al-Qaeda associates, provide intelligence on bin Laden and his network, and expel all terrorists from Afghanistan.
And the Taliban's response?
They refused. And that refusal led to Operation Enduring Freedom launching on October 7th, 2001.
And what did the initial invasion force look like?
The US actually went in with a relatively small force, about 5,500 troops, but they were backed by the Northern Alliance, which had between 15,000 to 20,000 fighters.
That seems surprisingly small for such a major operation.
Yeah, but what made it effective was the combination of US air power, special forces, and the Northern Alliance's ground forces. The Taliban had about 45,000 fighters, but they couldn't withstand the precision strikes and coordinated attacks.
Tell me about the fall of Kabul. How did that unfold?
It was remarkably swift. On November 12th, 2001, the Taliban's front line north of Kabul just melted away. After weeks of US bombing, they simply ran.
Just ran? Just like that?
Well, there's evidence there was some coordination with Taliban frontline commanders, but yes, the next day, November 13th, the Northern Alliance entered Kabul and met no resistance.
What happened to the Taliban leadership?
They retreated south to Kandahar, their spiritual birthplace, and to the Tora Bora Mountains. Bin Laden and the al-Qaeda leadership went with them.
You mentioned earlier how quickly this all happened, just 5 weeks of bombing before Kabul fell. Did that swift victory maybe mask some deeper problems?
Absolutely. The rapid collapse of Taliban control created this illusion of total victory, but what we were really seeing was just the beginning of what would become America's longest war.
And the human cost of this war, the numbers are staggering.
They really are. According to Brown University's Costs of War project, over 46,000 Afghan civilians died as a direct result of the fighting, but the real toll is likely much higher.
Higher? How so?
Well, those numbers don't include deaths from disease, lack of food, water, or other indirect consequences of the war. Some estimates put the total civilian death toll between 106,000 and 170,000.
That's devastating.
And beyond the deaths, you had massive displacement. About 2.7 million Afghans became refugees in neighboring countries, mainly Pakistan and Iran. Another 4 million were internally displaced.
You know what strikes me? The contrast between the initial military success and the long-term challenges that followed.
Right, because the mission evolved. It went from a focused counter-terrorism operation to this massive nation-building effort.
And the cost of that effort was enormous, wasn't it?
Staggering. By 2020, the Pentagon estimated the cost at $825 billion. But when you factor in everything, reconstruction, veteran care, some estimates put it over $2 trillion.
$2 trillion.
And here's a striking detail. By 2011, it was costing over $1 million per year to keep just one US soldier in Afghanistan.
Let's talk about the Taliban's tactics during their retreat. I've heard about something called the Shomali Scorched Earth campaign.
Yes, this was actually before the US invasion. The Taliban had systematically burned vineyards, orchards, and homes in the Shomali region to prevent any resistance. The scale was industrial. It created this completely blackened landscape.
That's horrific.
And it shows their brutality. But it also demonstrates why many Afghans initially welcomed the invasion. They saw it as liberation from Taliban rule.
Were there any positive developments during the war?
There were some. Life expectancy improved, maternal mortality rates were halved, and women gained more rights, including 27% of seats in parliament being reserved for women.
But those gains were fragile, weren't they?
Very. Despite these improvements, Afghanistan still ranked second to last globally in women's well-being, just ahead of Yemen. And by 2019, 3.7 million children were still out of school, 60% of them girls.
It really shows the limits of military power in creating lasting social change.
Exactly. The military victory was swift, but the deeper challenges, governance, development, human rights, those proved far more difficult to address.
Let's talk about the international coalition. This wasn't just a US operation, right?
No, it brought together numerous allies: the UK, France, Canada, Italy, Germany, Australia, New Zealand. NATO invoked Article 5 for the first time in its history.
Article 5, that's the collective defense clause.
Right. It means an attack on one NATO member is considered an attack on all. This was the first time it had ever been used.
And what about the military casualties?
The Afghan military and police suffered the heaviest losses, between 66,000 and 69,000 dead. The US and NATO lost 3,186 troops, with many more wounded.
Those numbers really bring home the cost of this war.
And what's particularly tragic is that civilian casualties actually increased in the later years of the war. 2015 and 2016 consecutively broke records for annual civilian deaths.
How did this war change US foreign policy?
It fundamentally shifted America's focus. Before Lumpfen, US policy was still largely shaped by Cold War thinking. After the invasion, counterterrorism became the central priority.
And that shift is still affecting policy today?
Absolutely. Though interestingly, we're seeing another shift now, away from counterterrorism and back toward great power competition with countries like Russia and China.
It's like we've come full circle.
In a way, yes. But the lessons of Afghanistan, about the limits of military power and the challenges of nation building, those continue to influence policy decisions.
What about the impact on Afghanistan's neighbors?
Pakistan was particularly affected. The conflict spilled across their border, leading to an armed conflict that killed about 67,000 people between 2001 and 2021.
That's a crucial point. These conflicts don't stay contained within borders.
No, they don't. Afghanistan shares a 2,670-kilometer border with Pakistan, much of it mountainous. It's almost impossible to control.
Looking back at the initial invasion, what lessons should we take from it?
I think the key lesson is that military victory doesn't guarantee long-term success. The Taliban fell quickly, but the real challenges came in building lasting stability.
And those challenges proved much harder to solve with military power alone.
Exactly. The war showed that while you can win battles with superior firepower, winning the peace requires addressing deeper social, economic, and political issues.
Do you think that lesson has been learned?
Well, there's certainly more recognition now of the complexities involved in these interventions, but whether that will influence future decisions, that remains to be seen.
And here we are, 20 years later, with the US withdrawal in 2021.
You know what's striking? The pattern. Each invading power thought they could succeed where others had failed.
Why do you think that is? What makes Afghanistan so difficult to control?
It's a combination of factors. The terrain is incredibly challenging. Mountains, valleys, caves. Perfect for defenders, nightmare for invaders.
And I imagine the local knowledge of that terrain is a huge advantage.
Absolutely. Plus, there's the decentralized nature of Afghan society. Even when you control the cities, the countryside is another story entirely.
It's fascinating how this pattern keeps repeating through history.
And each invading power faced similar challenges, despite their technological advantages.
From ancient Persians to modern Americans.
You know what's really interesting? Despite all these invasions, Afghanistan has maintained its distinct cultural identity.
That's true. It's absorbed influences, but never fully submitted to foreign control.
Exactly. And that resilience is a huge part of Afghan identity today.
Looking at this history, what lessons can we learn?
Well, one clear lesson is that military superiority alone isn't enough. You can't just impose control from the outside.
And understanding local culture and traditions is crucial.
Right. Every power that's tried to reshape Afghanistan in its own image has ultimately failed.
It's really a testament to the strength and resilience of the Afghan people.
And their ability to maintain their identity through centuries of invasions and attempts at control.
Do you think this pattern will continue in the future?
History suggests it might. Afghanistan's strategic location means it will always be important geopolitically.
at the crossroads of Central and South Asia.
Exactly. As long as that strategic value remains, powers will likely continue to vie for influence there.
But maybe future powers will learn from the past?
History suggests otherwise. Each new power tends to think they'll be the exception.
The definition of insanity, doing the same thing and expecting different results.
And Afghanistan has seen that play out repeatedly over 3 centuries.
Well, this has been a fascinating journey through Afghanistan's history of resistance.
It really shows how geography, culture, and determination can overcome even the world's mightiest empires.
And perhaps that's the real lesson here. Some things just can't be conquered by force alone.
No matter how many empires try.
And welcome to Math Show. This is your space to explore big ideas through books, society, knowledge, and history, all with one goal: to build a better world and a brighter future. If you are curious, reflective, and ready to grow, you're in the right place. So tap follow, hit subscribe, and let's get thinking.
Show, let's go, open up your mind and grow. Facts and stories, things you never know. Every episode, we light the glow. Step into the world of Math Show. Turn it up, let the rhythm flow. Feel the beat, take control. Don't be shy, just let it go. This is where the magic grows. Tune in now, it's the Math Show. Lights up bright and minds will glow. Every day we learn and grow. Come along and join the flow. New ideas begin to shine. Breaking limits, crossing lines. Every moment feels divine. In the world of Math Show time. Turn it up, let the rhythm flow. Feel the beat, take control. Don't be shy, just let it go. This is where the magic grows. Tune in now, it's the Math Show. Lights up bright and minds will glow. Every day we learn and grow. Come along and join the flow.